I'm joined today by the Chief Executive of the PDC, Matt Porter. Matt, how are you?
I'm well, Burton. How are you?
I'm also well. Thank you for joining us. Last time we had you on the show was in October of last year, right towards the end, the best end of 2022 with all the television events. And you said that 2022 was a reset year after the challenges of the pandemic the previous 2 years. How do you reflect on the year as we've now turned the page into 2023?
Well, I think it did what we set out for it to achieve, which was to get us back to where we were pre-pandemic with a full calendar and as much activity as possible. Obviously the Asian tour was slower getting going, but apart from that, we were up and running pretty much everywhere else where we had been before COVID, and we've been able to take that on this year. So, that's firmly behind us now, and it wasn't a time that we'd particularly want to dwell on for too long, even though I thought we dealt with it well. It's certainly something that I'm happy to see consigned to history. So let's look forwards and onwards and upwards.
Indeed. And you mentioned the Asian tour. We'll come around to that and some of the other regional tours in a few questions. But when we had you on last time, it was during the World Grand Prix. And I know you often get asked about when or if the event will ever return to Ireland. The City West is unavailable, and you said other venues are not quite suitable. Is there any update on the PDC bringing that event or some other events to Ireland, or is it still the same?
Yeah, it's still the same conundrum with venues. Unfortunately, Ireland isn't blessed with as many arenas as some other places. So it's a challenge for us, but we are still keen to take some additional content back to Ireland. It's just a case of finding the right venue, and I've got a long list to plough through, some of which we've looked at and crossed off, some of which we've looked at and put question marks next to, and some of which we haven't looked at yet. So it's an ongoing process. It won't happen this year, but I won't rule it out for 2024.
Right, and we will look onwards and upwards, like you said, but two more questions looking back. There was still a vacant World Championship spot when we had you on last time. It ended up going to the winner of the Women's World Match Play, Fallon Sherrock. I know there was a bit of a mixed reaction, especially on social media, with some people saying that Fallon got shoehorned in after failing to finish in the top two. Can you walk us through how the PDC decided to come to that decision? Of course, we know that the Women's World Match Play winner will get a spot this year. That's been announced.
Yeah, I mean, we probably didn't handle it as well as we could have done in terms of the timing of the announcement, but we'd always had it in mind as an option. And when we discussed with Sky and some of the other event stakeholders about the progression of darts, it was deemed that a third female spot, a third women's spot was a positive thing for the event. So we went down that route. Some people got very upset, but I'm sure they're all okay now.
Hope so.
So do I. If they're not, then we've got a problem.
Well, it is now 2023, and I do want one question looking back so far this year, because it started out with the final 3 days at Ali Bali on the 1st through 3rd of January, and what a few days that was, especially the viral moment, the 9-dart leg. I had friends in the U.S. who were sending me pictures of that who have never watched darts before. In terms of numbers, where does that stack up in terms of viral moments in PDC? And is there anyone that you've spotted talking about it that surprised you the most?
Well, funnily enough, literally just as you phoned me, I was watching it because I was sending it to somebody in another country where we're looking to do an event. So it's just a seminal moment. I think it probably eclipses anything else we've had on social media by some stretch. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know our media team got very excited about the reach that it got. And yeah, look, we've seen the celebrities and the media personalities who've referenced it and included it on their podcasts and their shows and their reels and everything like that. So I think it just transcended where we normally reach as a sport. It was a moment of genuine excitement. It was a moment of drama, a moment of atmosphere, and a moment that really just showcased darts in a perfect way. You can't script those sort of things. You can't plan for them. You can't expect them. But when they come along, you have to take advantage of them. So it's something that we use as a marketing tool now, and it's something that we're very proud of. And I think both the players involved in that moment will, I'm sure in years to come, look back on it and think that was pretty special.
Of course, a showcase moment in the showcase event. But of course, one of the other showcase events is the Premier League. Some years the 8 or 10, depending on how many at the time, pick themselves This year is probably not one of those years. If you ask 10 different people, you've got in 10 different lineups. Two related questions on it. Was this the hardest year picking the lineup that you've experienced? And for our German listeners, how close was Gabriel Clemens to getting selected after that remarkable run at Ali Pali he had?
It was definitely the hardest year for selection. Though, as you rightly say, you asked 10 different people for a lineup and you would have got 10 different answers. And I think that's testimony to the strength in depth we've got beneath that elite four who picked themselves. I think that Gabriel wasn't perhaps as close as some people may have said. Look, people were just assuming that because he's German and Germany is a growing market for us, that we were just going to put him in straight away. But as we've been very clear on saying, we put in players who were regularly featuring in the latter stages of our major tournaments in the second half of 2022. And the four guys who we picked, their records in terms of reaching finals, semis, quarters stands up for itself. So Gabriel had a great run in the World Championship, and who's to say if he'd have got to the final it wouldn't have been a different story, or obviously won the event. But I don't think he would argue, or anybody would argue, that he'd done more over the period leading up to the Premier League than the guys that we selected.
That's fair enough. Now, of course, start of 2023. In between Ali Pali and the Masters were two World Series events. Usually it's been a quiet period in the PDC. There's obviously Q School for those trying to get on tour. But this year, those two World Series events, what was the reaction, especially for first one in Bahrain? And any indication on whether we'll see more World Series events, including those back in January 2024?
Yeah, I mean, with both of those events, we work with external promoters who obviously have a lot of control over the date, or a lot of say in the date that we pick. Our calendar is hugely limited by the Premier League. I mean, the Premier League being on a Thursday night essentially wipes out 4 months worth of weekends for overseas events, because you just physically can't get the players there on time. Nobody wants to be flying the players in on a Friday morning to play Friday evening. That's just not good preparation for them, or it's too risky for the tournament with bad weather and travel problems and things like that. So we are really limited on the weekends that we can play World Series events, and those January weekends were both clear in the calendar. Obviously, Michael van Gerwen had a holiday pre-booked, so he missed Bahrain. That's fair enough. But the tournaments survive without one or two players if they're unable to play, because people in wherever we go, they go to see the event and see a range of players. So I'm pleased with how they both went. Bahrain, obviously, the crowd wasn't thousands and thousands of people. There was hundreds of people there, and they enjoyed it, a mixture of both expats and locals. And then the Copenhagen event is pretty well established now.
Now, speaking of Copenhagen event, that was, of course, a World Series event, but there are now the Euro Tour up and running. We've already had one event, as we're speaking, qualifiers for the sixth event going on. And you hinted to us when we had you on last time that there would be changes coming in terms of players withdrawing because you weren't happy with all the buys. I think there was one event where there were 4 or 5 withdrawals near the end of the year. We've now got penalties in place and a reserve list through the Pro Tour Order of Merit. How did those decisions come about, and do you expect the penalties to be enough of a deterrent to stop players from having late withdrawals?
Well, I hope so. I mean, the penalties were there before, but they were quite minor compared to what they are now. So we've reinforced that, and we've spoken to a lot of the players and just said to them about the importance of schedule management. As I've said plenty of occasions, there's no pressure on players to play in every event. We encourage players to manage their schedule and to take weekends off, particularly those guys who are in the Premier League and playing every week. So it's not a problem if you don't want to play, but don't decide you don't want to play at midnight on Thursday night or 8 o'clock on Friday morning, because number one, it's unprofessional. Number two, it's not fair on the other players, who could have played in place of you. And number three, it makes the event look, that reduces the event's credibility. If there's buys, as you rightly say, there was an event last year. I think it was the Belgian one with 3 or 4 buys on the Friday afternoon. It's not a good look for the event, particularly now as we're getting more interest from broadcasters and selling more tickets. So we just want players to plan in advance when they do and when they don't want to play. And bearing in mind, of course, look, somebody can always get ill last minute, or somebody's flight can always be cancelled last minute. There's always issues like that. And we would never unduly punish a player in a circumstance that was out of their control. But we just don't want people to qualify, take it for granted that they're in the event, and then shortly beforehand say, oh, no, I can't be bothered, I'm not going to go to that one.
Now, so far, we've seen some really good starts for some of the new tour card holders this year, but there's two of them we haven't seen play yet, Corey Cadby and Christian Perez. Believe that might be visa-related issues for both of them. Are you able to give us an update on them at this time?
Yeah, I mean, they're both going through the process of obtaining UK visas. There's a visa which you can come in on for a short period of time or for an irregular period of time, and I think they both had that. But in order for them to come and relocate over here to play on the Pro Tour regularly, they need to get a more permanent visa. So that process is ongoing. It's possibly taking a little bit longer than either of them would have liked. It's been best part of 2 months now since Q School, but hopefully it'll be resolved shortly.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 2 months already since Q School. We'll go away from the Pro Tour for a second. In the past couple weekends, we've seen a record number of entries, over 140 for the women's series. We also saw on the return of the Asian Tour, almost double the amount that there had been pre-pandemic. What's your reaction to those two numbers, and what future growth do you see for both the women's series and the Asian Tour at this time?
Well, I think it's testimony to the commitment of players, both the women who want to play on the women's series and the players in Asia who've been so patient waiting for the Asian Tour to start up again. They're big commitments, and I think it's the rewards that are on offer are not going to be accessible to a lot of the players on those tours, but they play for other reasons as well. They play because they enjoy it. They play because they enjoy the atmosphere, and they appreciate the professionalism that goes into the setup at the events, and they want to progress themselves and see how far they want to go. So we'll just keep providing the opportunities, and I think the players will appreciate that and step up. The prize money is good, and the number of opportunities is good. That with playing two events on a day gives you double jeopardy. So I think there's a good positive feeling around a lot of our secondary tours at the moment, and we just want to make sure that we keep delivering a high standard of events and regular activity to encourage more and more players to play.
Now, we'll continue getting some frequent flyer miles on this interview. We talked about almost half the world so far, but big news as well in the past recently, both involving North America and Africa. New 3-year deal between the PDC and the CDC, as well as the new partnership with the African Continental Tour starting up. We'll start, though, with the PDC and the CDC. How important is the deal for continuing the push into the North American market?
Yeah, I mean, look, the CDC is the organisation in North America if you're a serious steel tip player. So we're very committed to them. They do a great job. I think it's been borne out by the growth of the US Masters since it moved to New York, and the number of North American tour card holders that we've seen in recent years as well, many of whom have put in a great commitment by almost commuting forward and backwards across the Atlantic. So the CDC is continuing to grow. We're continuing to help them as best we can, and long may that continue. And then for the African Darts Group, which is Devon Peterson's fledgling organisation, it's really a toe in the water. Africa's been a barren ground for us for many years now. Devon's the right guy. He's got the right mentality. He's got the right passion and enthusiasm for taking darts forward, not just there, but across Africa. We've introduced him to a number of people in different countries on the continent, and hopefully they can put something together between them and grow. But let's be realistic about that, that one, and not put too much pressure on that. I think if you look at where the Asian Tour, where the DPA, DPNZ, the Nordic and Baltic Tour and the CDC they're well established and they've been operating for a while now. So don't expect miracles from Africa, but hopefully baby steps and some steady growth over the next few years.
Now, we'll come on to some listener questions in a bit, but have to ask about the big news last week, the announcement regarding the World Cup. I would assume our listeners all know by now, but the big news is that it's expanded to 40 from the 32 that it's been for almost a decade now, as well as that it will be entirely pairs. Obviously, I think this has been a popular announcement. It's something that I know we've talked about. A lot of people on social media have asked for quite some time now. But how did that decision come about to change it to pairs only?
We just sat down and talked about it. I mean, I don't want to make it sound boring, but that's kind of how we come up with our formats and our schedules and things like that. We sit down and we have an adult conversation about the options to see what might be best to implement. And we know that a lot of public opinion has been pro doubles in recent years, and it certainly adds an identity to the World Cup, which other events don't have. I think there's an argument to say that the best of 7 format that we've had before generates a lot of excitement, because in those short matches you can have upsets. And will we get that in the longer matches? Well, maybe not, but time will tell. But it was worth a shake-up, and as we expanded to 40 countries, we were pleased to bring the group stages in as well, so that the countries, say the lesser countries maybe who have long trips to get to Germany, at least get two bites of the cherry rather than just one go on the stage. So that was an important development not to be overlooked as well. And we thought perhaps if we're going to change a little bit of the format of the tournament, why don't we change quite a lot of it? So it's a pretty major shake-up, really.
One of the additions with that expansion to 40 is that one of the spots is not yet known, as there'll be a qualifier for Central and Latin America. We have a listener question from a Turkish citizen, Alperin. What is the process for selecting countries for the World Cup of Darts, and what should other countries do to be in the conversation to get selected in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we do get a lot of approaches from countries who are not involved. We invite countries where we see there being darts activity that we're part of the process of. So it's either players coming from those countries to compete in our events, or are we seeing some broadcaster interest? Are we seeing people pitching to host events on other regional tours? And there's all sorts of different factors. But what you're seeing in Latin America with the qualifier for this year is something that we are considering rolling out further for future years to make it a truly open global event, rather than closed on an invitation-only basis. So I think it's something that we'll watch and see how that goes and how the format goes, because it's relatively tricky with pairs. You don't tend to have pre-existing darts pair teams in many places, if you know what I mean. So would people choose themselves who they played with? Would it come off rankings? Would there be a draw for it? There's all sorts of different ways of looking at that. So let's see how it goes over in Central and Latin America this year, and then see what our options are for some spots in the tournament in the future.
A couple more listener questions. This one comes from Zach Clark. We talked about the Premier League already with the selection, but another thing that has to be selected each year is the venues. We've seen obviously in recent years Rotterdam, we've seen Berlin. Could we see a Premier League night in Belgium or somewhere else in Europe in the near future?
Possibly. It's not something that I don't think we're not rushing to do that. Our host broadcaster for the event is Sky Sports, and it's obviously a UK broadcaster, so we have to be mindful of that. And to sort of decamp the whole operation to Europe for one night is a costly and time-consuming process. So we're happy to do it in the Netherlands and Germany. And don't get me wrong, they're making great strides in Belgium. The interest levels there are astronomical now compared to a few years ago. But we won't just be taking it to new countries without real compelling reason to do so. So I'm not ruling it out, but it's not a short-term priority.
And another question, this one comes from Ben Hutter. Slightly related question because it also involves events in Europe, but it deals with open draw events, especially on the back end of another highly successful and entertaining and wide open UK Open. Do you think we could see another open draw event added to the calendar, perhaps in Germany, the Netherlands, or even a return of the US Open? Or do you think that would take away something from the uniqueness of the UK Open?
Yeah, well, I think that certainly applies. The drama of the draw for the UK Open makes it really watchable. And also, for us to do that, we would then either have to bring in another new event, which we're not really planning to do because we haven't really got enough time to do all the events we want to do anyway, or we'd have to drastically alter the format of one of the existing events. So, no, I think, look, if it's a ranking event, then the reason it's a ranking event and the reason you qualify the way you qualify is because you deserve that spot. So the uniqueness of the UK Open, I think, is in that, as you say, use that word unique.
And lastly, this question, it is a listener question, but it's also it's a question that comes from one of the markers and officials on the PDC Pro Tour, Owen Binks. He, of course, is a Colchester fan. We know you're a director for Leyton Orient. He mentions, the background here mentions that you guys are in first, and we're not even mentioning where Colchester is.
No,
but
they're miles off it.
But do you think Colchester United could nick a cheeky point at Brisbane Road later this month to make Owen happy?
No, let's hope not. Owen, look, I'll buy you a drink at an event if that makes you happy, but you can't have a point off us. We need to win the league or get promoted. So, sorry, mate.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us, and hope that everything continues to go well this year.
Anytime. My pleasure, guys. Nice to talk to you.